A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, edited and retold. Chapter 1. Marley was dead to begin with. There's no doubt about that. He was as dead as a doornail. He had been dead for 7 years now. Did Scrooge know this? Of course he did. He was, after all, the only one, apart from the undertaker, who went to Marley's funeral. Marley and Scrooge were business partners once, but then Marley died, and now their firm belonged to Scrooge, who was a stingy and heartless old man. Once upon a time, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his office. It was cold, nasty weather, and the fog was thick. In Scrooge's office, it was not much warmer either. Suddenly, a cheerful person entered the office. It was Scrooge's nephew. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" Fred said. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug!" "Christmas humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "You're too poor to be merry. What is Christmas but a time for paying bills, and a time for finding yourself a year older? I do not need Christmas, and Christmas does not need me. Keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it? But you don't keep it," said Scrooge's nephew, who was a very friendly young man. He even tried to cheer Scrooge up and invited him for dinner on Christmas Day. But Scrooge said no and sent him out. When Scrooge's nephew left, 2 gentlemen came in to collect money for the poor, who had no place to go. Stingy Scrooge, however, didn't give the gentlemen any money. "Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?" he asked sarcastically, and told them to leave the office. When it was time to close the office, Scrooge talked to his clerk, Bob Cratchit. "You want all day off tomorrow, I suppose?" said Scrooge. "If that's okay, sir. It's Christmas, sir. It only comes once a year," answered the clerk. "It's not okay," said Scrooge. "And it's a poor excuse. After all, I have to pay you for a day, although you don't work. You better be here even early in the next morning." Cratchit promised that he would, and the 2 went home. Scrooge lived all alone in an old house that used to belong to Marley. It was a nasty old place where no normal person would like to live. Now you must believe that there was nothing special about the knocker that hung on the door, except it was very large. As soon as Scrooge put his key in the door, the knocker seemed to change before his very eyes. Not a knocker, but Marley's face. But as Scrooge stared at it, the face changed back into a knocker. "Humbug," he said. Opened the door and walked in. He locked himself in, which he usually didn't do. But then he felt safe again and sat down before the fire. Suddenly Scrooge heard a noise, deep down below, as if somebody was dragging a heavy chain. The noise came nearer and nearer, and then Scrooge saw a ghost coming right through the heavy door. It was Marley's ghost, and his chains were long. They were made of cash boxes, keys, and steel padlocks. "Who are you?" said Scrooge. "In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley." "But why do you come to me now?" "I have come for you. I have come to warn you." "Warn me? About what?" asked Scrooge. The ghost replied, pointing to his chain. "Here, look! I made this chain. I made it when I was alive for my greed and my selfishness. I only cared about business, but not about people around me. Now I am here to warn you. You still have a chance at this. My time is nearly gone. Yours is just beginning. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. The first will come tomorrow at 1 o'clock in the night. When he had said these words, Marley's ghost disappeared, and the night became quiet again. Scrooge went straight to bed, without undressing, and fell asleep immediately. Chapter 2, And You Shall Fly With Me. When Scrooge awoke just before the clock rang 12, it was so dark that looking out of bed, he could not see his window. Marley's ghost bothered him. He could hardly believe that anyone, and not just anyone, for, as you know, Marley had been dead for 7 years, would come to see him in good faith. So his mind was twisted and turned, and he thought that it could easily just have been a dream. Then he remembered that a spirit should visit him at 1 o'clock. So Scrooge decided to lie awake and see what would happen. Suddenly the clock struck 1. Light flashed up in the room, and a small hand drew back the curtains of his bed. Then Scrooge found himself face to face with a visitor. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle in it. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge asked the ghost.
"I am the ghost of Christmas past. Rise and come with me. You must understand your past if you are to change your future."
The ghost took Scrooge back in time, to a place where Scrooge was a boy. There, Scrooge could see young children playing in the schoolyard. They were cheerfully running around the Christmas tree, but young Scrooge was nowhere to be seen. The ghost took Scrooge into the school building, where the young Scrooge was reading by a small fire, after being forgotten by the other children. The spirit also took Scrooge to a warehouse, where Scrooge was an apprentice. Scrooge saw the Merry Christmas Eve they spent in the office with their boss, Mr. Fezziwig, and his family. There was food and music and dancing, and everybody was happy. Then the spirit took Scrooge to yet another place. Scrooge was older now, a healthy young man. He was not alone, but sat by the side of a beautiful young girl, Belle. There were tears in her eyes.
"It is sad to see,"
she said softly,
"that another love has displaced me, the love of gold. Your heart was full of love once, but now you don't need me any more. All you need is money. You fear the world too much, which is why, with a full heart, I have to let you go. You have decided your future, and do not need me with you. May you be happy in the life you have chosen."
She walked away from him. Scrooge wanted to call out to her and follow her, but the ghost explained to him that these were just memories, shadows of a world that had once been. Chapter 3. God bless us, everyone. Scrooge woke up in the middle of a snore, just before the clock struck 1 again. He sat up in his bed and waited for the second ghost to come. And there it was, the ghost of Christmas Present. It was a giant with curly brown hair, sparkling eyes, and it wore a simple green robe with white fur. Its feet were bare, and on its head wore a holly wreath.
"Oh, come in,"
said the ghost.
"Welcome, Ebenezer. Look at me and touch my coat."
Suddenly, the room disappeared, and they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning. Despite the cold, people were making a rough kind of music, removing snow from the sidewalks in front of their houses. Carts were making deep marks in the snow, crisscrossing each other along the streets. The sky was dark, and the smallest streets were full of snow. There was nothing cheerful in the climate of the town, yet there was a cheerfulness in the air. Scrooge and the spirit walked through the wintry streets of this pleasant neighborhood, and soon arrived at the 4-roomed house of Scrooge's clerk, Bob Cratchit. And it was then that Scrooge saw what he had never seen before. A family caught in the moment. They were not very well dressed and their clothes were old. Their small house did not have much furniture or comfortable furniture. But the family was happy, grateful, and pleased with one another in the time that they had together. Miss Cratchit, Peter, Belinda, and Martha were all working in the kitchen to prepare Christmas dinner. Then the door opened and Bob Cratchit came in with Tiny Tim upon his shoulders. Tiny Tim was Bob Cratchit's youngest son. He bore a little crutch and had an iron frame around his limbs. When Christmas dinner was ready, everyone sat down at the table. As the Cratchits were very poor, it was not much they had for Christmas dinner. But still everyone was joyful, and you could feel that they all had the Christmas spirit in their hearts. "Merry Christmas to all, my dears. God bless us," said Bob Cratchit.
"God bless us, everyone,"
said Tiny Tim. He sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his hand, as if he feared to lose him. "Spirit," said Scrooge, who felt sorry for the boy. "Tell me, if Tiny Tim will live."
"Well, I see an empty seat,"
replied the ghost,
"and a crutch without an owner. If these shadows don't change in the future, the child will die."
This made Scrooge very sad, but the spirit went on and took Scrooge to his nephew's house. The room they were in was bright, dry, and warm. Fred and his friends had a very cheerful party and played games. "He said that Christmas was a humbug as I live," cried Scrooge's nephew. "He believed it too."
How sad, Fred,
said Scrooge's niece. Scrooge had never met his niece, and now seeing what he had missed, Scrooge felt a deep pain in his heart. "He's a funny old man," said Fred. "I am sorry for him. I couldn't be angry with him if I tried. Who really suffers from his greed and selfishness other than him? He may think Christmas a humbug, but I'm sure he can't stop thinking about it, especially after seeing me year after year inviting him to Christmas dinner. Let us toast to Uncle Scrooge, to his health and happiness. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man, wherever he is." Scrooge suddenly had a strange feeling of warmth as he heard these words. He wished to thank his nephew for the kind thought, but once again Scrooge and the spirit were off on their travels. They visited many homes in many places. They saw sick people who were cheerful, people in foreign lands who were close at home, poor people who felt rich that day, all because of the Christmas spirit. Suddenly Scrooge noticed something strange about the ghost. Two childlike figures were at the ghost's feet, a boy and a girl. But they looked old and dreadful, like little monsters. Scrooge was shocked. "Spirit, are they your creatures?" Scrooge asked.
"They are man's creatures,"
said the spirit.
"The boy is ignorance, the girl is want. Beware them both, but most of all, beware this boy,"
said the spirit. Have they no place they can go?" asked Scrooge.
"Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?"
The spirit turned on Scrooge with his own words. The bell struck 12. The ghost of Christmas present disappeared, and at the last stroke of the bell, Scrooge saw a dark, tall figure coming towards him like a fog along the ground. Chapter 4. The Last of the Spirits. Slowly and silently the ghost came near. The air around seemed full of unhappiness. It was wearing a deep black cloak, which hid its face so that the only thing Scrooge could see was one outstretched hand. "Are you the ghost of Christmas yet to come?" asked Scrooge. The spirit did not answer, but pointed with its hand. Although Scrooge was now used to these visits, he was completely unprepared for this dark spirit. "Oh, ghost of the future, I fear you more than any other spirit," Scrooge cried. "But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live a different man from what I was, I am prepared for your company." The ghost did not say a word, and Scrooge was really scared. They wandered through the city, and Scrooge heard some men. The ghost did not say a word, and Scrooge was really scared. They wandered through the city, and Scrooge heard some men talking about a person who had died. Scrooge knew the businessmen, and he wanted to find out whom they were talking about. But the spirit moved on. They next stopped in an area where thieves and liars lived. They had stolen things with them and made fun of the person who once owned those things.
He frightened everybody away from him when he was alive, to profit us when he was dead.
After that, the ghost led Scrooge through the streets that were familiar to him. And as they went along, Scrooge looked here and there to find himself, but nowhere was he to be seen. In the poor area of Camden Town, the spirit led Scrooge to the house of Bob Cratchit. They entered a poor house and found the mother and the children by the fire, quiet, very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues. Bob Cratchit was sitting in a corner, crying like a child. There were no more words of warmth, no voices of hope, just stillness. In the corner of the room stood an empty chair with a small crutch leaning against it. Tiny Tim, the joy of his family, had been taken from them. "Spirit," said Scrooge, with tears beginning to form in his eyes, "why has the child died?" The ghost said nothing, and the scene surrounding them changed once more. The ghost took Scrooge to an overgrown churchyard. The spirit stood among the graves and pointed down to one. Scrooge waited, his legs going dead under him. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. Scrooge slowly went towards it, and following the ghost's finger, read upon the stone of the grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "No, no, spirit," Scrooge cried. "Hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man that I have been so far. Why show me this if I'm past all hope? Good spirit, I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The three spirits, they shall be within me. I will not ignore the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may change my fate." Full of fear, Scrooge caught the spirit's hand. But the spirit suddenly changed. It shrunk, and it faded and finally turned into the bedpost. Chapter 5. The End of It. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, and he could make the best of it. "I will live in the past, the present, and the future," Scrooge repeated as he got out of bed. The spirits, all three will live within me. I don't know what to do. I'm as happy as an angel. I don't know what day of the month it is. I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. Hey! Hello there! He ran to the window and opened it, and put out his head. "Excuse me, what's today? What's today?" cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes.
Today?
Replied the boy.
Why, it's Christmas Day.
"It's Christmas Day," said Scrooge to himself. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. Hello, my fine boy. Do you know the butcher's at the corner? And do you know whether they've sold the big turkey that was hanging up there?
What? The one as big as me?
Returned the boy.
It's still hanging there now.
Is it? Said Scrooge. Go and buy it. I am in earnest. Go and buy it, and come back with the man that I may give him the direction of where to take it. I'll give you a shilling for it. Come back with the man in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit, whispered Scrooge cheerfully. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. He had not gone far when he came towards the two gentlemen who had walked into his office the day before. My dear sir, said Scrooge, how do you do? I fear I wasn't pleasant to you yesterday. Allow me to ask your pardon. And would you have the goodness to... Here Scrooge whispered into his ear.
Lord bless me!
Cried the gentleman.
My dear Scrooge, are you serious? I don't know what to say to such generosity.
Scrooge then went to church and walked through the streets and watched the people. He had never dreamed that anything could give him so much happiness. In the afternoon, he went to his nephew's house, and he certainly surprised him, and his wife, and their friends. Fred, said Scrooge. It's your uncle, Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Of course, Fred let him in. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful happiness. Scrooge enjoyed himself so much that he hoped that Christmas would never end. But Scrooge was early at the office next morning. Oh, was he early there. If he could only catch Bob Cratchit coming late. And he did it. Yes, he did. Bob was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come in. Hello, growled Scrooge in his usual way. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day? I am not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, he continued, jumping from his stool, and therefore, I'm about to raise your salary. A Merry Christmas, Bob. Bob did not know what to think. He just stood there with his mouth open, not able to move a finger. Bob Cratchit was very surprised, and so were many people who found Scrooge so changed. Scrooge became a better person. To Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. Scrooge became a friend to all, and his own heart laughed. May that truly be said of us, all of us.